The young woman sighed as she pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and the bags under her eyes told the story of someone who hadn't had a proper night's sleep in days. At 26, she was already carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. For 3 years now, she had been working as a housekeeper at this 5-star hotel. The pay was decent, but between caring for her sick mother and paying off her younger brother's college loans, every penny she earned was spoken for before it even reached her bank account. "Hey, May," called her supervisor from down the hall. "I need you to take the penthouse suite today. Apparently, the big boss is coming tomorrow, and everything needs to be perfect." May nodded and adjusted her uniform. The penthouse suite was reserved for the hotel owner and CEO, a man she had never seen but had heard plenty about. Rumor had it that he was strict, demanding, and incredibly particular about how things were done in his hotels. "No problem," she replied, trying to mask her exhaustion. She had just finished a double shift yesterday and had barely made it home in time to give her mother her medicine before collapsing into bed for a few hours of restless sleep. As she rode the service elevator to the top floor, May fought to keep her eyes open. The gentle hum of the elevator wasn't helping her stay awake. When the doors finally opened, she wheeled her cart into the most luxurious floor of the hotel. The penthouse suite was something out of a dream, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city, plush carpets that felt like walking on clouds, and furniture that probably cost more than what she would earn in several years. May started with the bathroom, scrubbing the marble surfaces until they gleamed. Next, she moved to dust the living area, carefully handling the expensive decorations and artwork. By the time she reached the bedroom, her limbs felt heavy, and her eyelids were drooping dangerously. "Just need to finish making the bed," she mumbled to herself, struggling to keep her focus. She changed the sheets with practiced efficiency, but when it came time to arrange the decorative pillows, she found herself sitting on the edge of the massive king-sized bed, just for a moment to catch her breath. The mattress was unlike anything she had ever felt before, it seemed to cradle her tired body perfectly. Before she knew what was happening, her eyes closed, and her head gently touched the pillow. "Just 5 minutes," she whispered to herself. "Just 5 minutes to rest." He arrived at his hotel a day earlier than planned. At 34, the CEO had built an empire from scratch, turning a single boutique hotel into a global chain of luxury accommodations. His success came at a price, though: long hours, constant travel, and very little time for a personal life. As his private car pulled up to the Grand Plaza Hotel, he adjusted his tie and prepared for the usual flurry of activity that accompanied his visits. Hotel managers would be falling over themselves to impress him, and he would have to put on the face of the stern, demanding boss they all expected him to be. "Sir, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow," stammered the hotel manager as he rushed through the lobby to greet him. "Change of plans," he replied simply. "I'd like to go straight to my suite. No need for a tour today." Relief washed over the manager's face. "Of course, sir. I'll have someone bring your luggage up right away." He took his private key card and headed for the elevator, savoring the brief moment of solitude. These surprise visits were the best way to see how his hotels really operated when they weren't putting on a show for him. The penthouse suite was quiet when he entered. Everything appeared to be in perfect order, exactly as he expected. He loosened his tie and walked toward the bedroom, already planning to review the quarterly reports before dinner. What he saw when he pushed open the bedroom door stopped him in his tracks. There, curled up on his bed, was a young woman in a hotel housekeeper's uniform, sound asleep. Her cleaning cart was still by the window, job half finished, and she was clutching one of the decorative pillows to her chest as she slept deeply. His first instinct was anger. This was completely unprofessional and grounds for immediate dismissal. He opened his mouth to wake her, but something made him pause. The dark circles under her eyes were evident even in sleep, and there was something so vulnerable about the way she had simply collapsed from exhaustion that he couldn't bring himself to disturb her. Instead, he quietly backed out of the room, closed the door, and called the front desk. "This is the CEO. I need information on one of your housekeeping staff. The one assigned to my suite today." After a brief conversation, he hung up the phone with a thoughtful expression. Mei Lin had been with the hotel for 3 years. She had an exemplary record, often took extra shifts, and had never had a single complaint against her. He learned that she was supporting her mother who had chronic health issues and helping her younger brother through university. He glanced at his watch. It was just past 2 p.m. Making a decision, he grabbed his laptop and headed for the suite's living room. He could work there and let her rest a bit longer. Mei jolted awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then reality came crashing down on her like a bucket of ice water. She had fallen asleep, in the CEO's bed. Horror flooded through her as she checked her watch. What had been intended as a 5-minute rest had turned into a 3-hour nap. "Oh no, no, no," she whispered, scrambling to her feet and straightening her wrinkled uniform. She could lose her job for this, the job her family depended on. Tears pricked at her eyes as she rushed to grab her cleaning supplies and finish the work she had abandoned. She was frantically arranging the decorative pillows when she heard a voice from the doorway. "I see you're finally awake." Mei froze, then slowly turned around. A tall man in an expensive suit was leaning against the doorframe, watching her with an unreadable expression. She immediately recognized him from the photos in the hotel lobby. It was him, the CEO himself. "Sir, I am so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't know what came over me. I just sat down for a moment, and..." He held up a hand to stop her. "How many hours did you work yesterday, Mei?" The fact that he knew her name made her even more nervous. 16 hours, sir. Double shift. And the day before? 14 hours. We were short-staffed." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "When was the last time you had a day off?" Mei tried to remember, counting back in her head. 12 days ago, I think." The CEO pushed himself away from the doorframe and walked into the room. Mei braced herself for the firing that was surely coming. To her surprise, he just gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, please." She hesitantly perched on the edge of the chair, clutching her cleaning cloth like a lifeline. "I've been reviewing your employee file," he said, his tone businesslike. 3 years with us, consistently excellent performance reviews, often the first to volunteer for extra shifts." "Yes, sir," she whispered, wondering if he was listing her accomplishments to soften the blow of firing her. "And yet our policy clearly states that employees should not work more than 10 consecutive days without a break, nor should they exceed 12 hours in a single shift except in emergency situations." His eyes were intense as he looked at her. "Those policies exist for a reason, to prevent exactly what happened here today." Mei lowered her gaze, shame washing over her. "I needed the money, sir. My mother's medication is expensive, and my brother's tuition payment was due." To her surprise, his expression softened slightly. "I understand responsibility to family, Mei. But running yourself into the ground won't help them in the long run." She nodded, still expecting to be fired at any moment. "I've spoken with your supervisor," he continued. "Starting tomorrow, you're being reassigned." Here it comes, thought Mei, bracing herself for the worst. "You'll be working directly with the hotel manager as an assistant. The hours are regular, 9 to 5, with weekends off. The pay is significantly better than your current position." Mei stared at him in disbelief. "Sir?" "Consider it a promotion," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed, but neither has the fact that this hotel has been breaking company policies regarding staff scheduling and overtime. I don't understand, she said honestly. Why would you promote me when you found me sleeping in your suite? The CEO looked at her for a long moment. Because anyone who works as hard as you do deserves recognition, not punishment for human limitations. He paused. And because I was impressed by your record long before I found you asleep on my bed. For the first time in what felt like forever, May smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept the position. And that you'll go home and get some proper rest tonight. Yes to both, she said quickly, still stunned by this unexpected turn of events. As she gathered her things to leave, the CEO found himself watching her with interest. There was something about her, a quiet strength and dignity despite her circumstances, that he found intriguing. Perhaps he would find more reasons to visit this particular hotel in the coming weeks. Neither of them knew it yet, but this unlikely meeting was just the beginning of their story. The next morning, May arrived at the hotel with butterflies in her stomach. After 3 years of changing sheets and scrubbing bathrooms, she was about to start a completely different job. She had spent the previous evening explaining the unexpected promotion to her mother, who had smiled proudly but also warned her to be careful. Rich men don't just give things away for free, her mother had said while sipping her evening tea. Be grateful, but keep your eyes open. May had nodded, though she couldn't help feeling that there was something genuine about the CEO. Despite his power and position, there had been kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her. Now, dressed in her best clothes, a modest navy blue skirt and white blouse she normally saved for special occasions, she made her way to the hotel manager's office. Her old housekeeping uniform was neatly folded in her bag, just in case this all turned out to be some kind of mistake. The hotel manager, Mr. Patel, greeted her with a warm smile. Ah, May. Right on time. The boss was very clear about your new position. He gestured to a small desk in the corner of his spacious office. You'll be working here, helping me coordinate between departments, handling some guest requests, and occasionally attending management meetings to take notes. May nodded eagerly. I'll do my best, sir. I know you will, he replied, then lowered his voice. Between us, I've never seen the boss take such a personal interest in a staff reassignment before. You must have really impressed him. Her cheeks warmed at the comment. Had she impressed him by drooling on his expensive pillows? The thought made her cringe internally, but she kept her expression neutral. The morning passed in a blur of new information as Mr. Patel showed her the computer system, explained her responsibilities, and introduced her to the department heads she would be working with. By lunchtime, her head was spinning, but in a good way. The work was challenging but interesting, a far cry from the repetitive physical labor of housekeeping. As she sat in the staff cafeteria with her lunch, her former supervisor, Jia, slid into the seat across from her. Look at you, Jia said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. From housekeeper to management in one day. The whole staff is talking about it. May shifted uncomfortably. I'm not management. I'm just an assistant. An assistant who reports directly to Mr. Patel and, from what I hear, to the big boss himself sometimes. Jia leaned forward. How did you really get this promotion, May? People don't jump from changing sheets to sitting in an office just like that. The implication in her tone was clear, and it stung. I worked hard for 3 years, May replied quietly but firmly. I never called in sick, never complained, took every extra shift offered. The CEO noticed. Jia raised an eyebrow. Sure he did. Well, enjoy it while it lasts. She got up and walked away, leaving May with her appetite gone. Back at her new desk, May threw herself into learning everything she could. She was determined to prove, to everyone, including herself, that she deserved this opportunity, regardless of how strangely it had come about. At 5 o'clock, Mr. Patel insisted she go home on time. "No more 16-hour days for you," he said cheerfully. "Boss's orders." As May gathered her things, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "How was your first day?" "LZ." She stared at the phone in confusion. "LZ?" Then it hit her, the CEO's initials. How had he gotten her personal number? And more importantly, why was he texting her directly? With slightly trembling fingers, she replied, "Very good, thank you for the opportunity." 3 dots appeared immediately, then, "Would you join me for dinner tonight? I'd like to discuss some ideas for improving staff welfare." The Penthouse, 7 p.m. Casual dress. May read the message 3 times. Was this a work meeting or something else? Her mother's warning echoed in her mind, but curiosity and something else, something she wasn't ready to name, prompted her to accept the invitation. The CEO, Mr. Lee, as she now knew him, was dressed down in slacks and a simple button-up shirt when she arrived at the Penthouse. The formal businessman from yesterday was gone, replaced by someone who looked younger and more approachable. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing toward a dining table set for 2 by the window. The city lights twinkled below them. "I hope you don't mind, but I ordered from the hotel kitchen. The chef here is excellent." "This is very kind of you, Mr. Lee," May said formally, still unsure of how to behave in this situation. He smiled. "Please, call me Jeanne when we're not in a formal setting." "Jeanne," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you should call me May." Dinner was a revelation, dishes she had only seen going out on room service trays but had never tasted. Throughout the meal, Jeanne asked her questions about her experience working at the hotel, listening intently to her answers and occasionally making notes on his phone. "So, the housekeeping staff doesn't get regular breaks?" he asked after hearing about her typical day before the promotion. May hesitated, not wanting to cause trouble for her former colleagues. "It's just the way things are during busy periods. We manage. But hotel policy clearly states." With respect, May interrupted gently, "Hotel policies are written by people who've never had to clean 15 rooms in a shift. In the real world, things work differently." Jeanne leaned back in his chair, studying her with newfound respect. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you, May. You see the gap between policy and practice. Between what I think is happening in my hotels and what's actually happening." As the evening progressed, May found herself relaxing. There was something disarming about the way Jeanne listened to her, really listened, without judgment or defensiveness. "You know," he said as they shared dessert, "I started at the bottom too. My first job was washing dishes at a restaurant when I was 16. The owner was a tyrant who treated staff like disposable parts in a machine." May looked up in surprise. "I thought you were born into a wealthy family." He laughed. "That's the story the marketing team likes to push. The reality is less glamorous. My parents were immigrants who worked factory jobs. Everything I have, I built." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared experience despite their current differences in status. When the evening came to an end, Jeanne walked her to the elevator. "Thank you for your honesty tonight, May. It's refreshing to hear the unvarnished truth." "Thank you for listening," she replied sincerely. Just as the elevator doors were about to close, he put his hand out to stop them. "I'll be in town for the next 2 weeks, overseeing some changes. Would you be willing to have dinner again? Tomorrow, perhaps?" May found herself nodding before she had time to think about all the reasons she should say no. Over the next 10 days, they fell into a routine. May worked her new job during the day, occasionally crossing paths with Jeanne in official capacities where they maintained professional distance. Then in the evenings, they would meet for dinner, sometimes in his suite, sometimes at small, out-of-the-way restaurants he wanted to try. They talked about everything, his vision for the hotel chain, her dreams of someday finishing the education she had abandoned to care for her mother, books they had read, places they hoped to visit. With each meeting, the line between professional relationship and friendship blurred a little more. May found herself looking forward to their evenings together, sharing thoughts she had never voiced to anyone else. And Jean, for his part, seemed to drop more of his CEO persona each time they met, showing her glimpses of the man behind the successful business facade. On the 11th night, they sat on the balcony of his suite, watching a spectacular thunderstorm roll across the city. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Jean said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. May felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Back to headquarters?" He nodded. "There's a board meeting I can't miss. Then I have to visit our properties in Europe." "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "You have a company to run." Jean turned to look at her, his expression serious. "These past days with you have been different. Special." May looked down at her hands. "For me too. I'd like to stay in touch, if that's all right with you." She glanced up at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'd like that." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face as he moved his chair closer to hers. "May, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart rate quickened. "What is it?" "When I promoted you, it was because you deserved it, your work record proved that. But I also wanted a reason to see you again." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've never met anyone like you. Someone who sees the world so clearly, without pretense." May held her breath, torn between the butterflies in her stomach and the warning bells in her head. This was her boss, the owner of the entire hotel chain. There were 1,000 reasons why what was happening between them was complicated. "I don't know what this is," she finally said, gesturing between them. "And I'm not sure it can be anything. Our lives are so different." Jean reached out slowly and took her hand in his. "Different doesn't mean incompatible." The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine possibilities, a world where the gap between their positions didn't matter, where the connection they'd formed could grow into something more. Thunder crashed overhead, making her jump slightly. The moment broke, and May gently pulled her hand away. "It's getting late," she said softly. "And you have an early flight tomorrow." Jean nodded, respecting her subtle withdrawal. "Will you see me off in the morning? My car leaves at 7 a.m. "Of course," she promised. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, May's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. In just 2 weeks, this man had upended her carefully ordered life. Given her a new job, yes, but also awakened feelings she'd long suppressed while focusing on survival and family responsibilities. Tomorrow he would leave, returning to his world of board meetings and international travel. And she would stay here, in her improved but still modest life. It was better this way, she told herself. Safer. Yet as she stepped out into the rain-washed night, May couldn't help but wonder if she was making the biggest mistake of her life by letting him go. The following morning arrived too quickly. May stood in the hotel lobby at 6:45 a.m., watching the staff prepare for the day. A sleek black car waited outside, and the driver was already loading Jean's luggage into the trunk. She had barely slept, her mind replaying their conversation from the night before. What did he really want from her? And more importantly, what did she want from him? At precisely 7 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and Jean stepped out. He was back in full CEO mode, tailored suit, polished shoes, and a serious expression that softened the moment he saw her. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I promised I would." May smiled, suddenly feeling shy in the bustling lobby where curious eyes watched their interaction. They walked together toward the entrance, maintaining a professional distance that felt strangely painful after the closeness they had shared. At the car, Jean turned to her. "I'll be gone for 3 weeks. Will you still be here when I return?" "Where else would I be?" she asked, attempting humor to mask her uncertainty. "Promise me something," he said, his voice low so only she could hear. "Don't let anyone push you around while I'm gone. This promotion wasn't charity, you earned it." May nodded, touched by his concern. He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say or do something more, but instead simply said, "I'll be in touch," before sliding into the car. May watched until the black vehicle disappeared into the morning traffic, then turned and walked back into the hotel, aware of whispers following her. The next 3 weeks tested May in ways she hadn't anticipated. Word had spread throughout the hotel about her special relationship with the CEO, and opinions were divided. Some colleagues were genuinely happy for her, while others made their jealousy or disapproval clear through cold shoulders and not-so-subtle comments. Mr. Patel remained professional and supportive, but even he seemed curious about the nature of her connection to Jean. "The boss has called twice this week asking for updates on how you're settling in," he mentioned casually one afternoon. "He's never taken such an interest in a staff member before." May focused on her computer screen, pretending to be absorbed in the spreadsheet she was updating. "He's just being thorough." Mr. Patel gave her a knowing look but didn't press further. True to his word, Jean stayed in touch. They exchanged text messages daily, sometimes just brief check-ins, other times longer conversations about their days. Occasionally, when the time difference allowed, he would call her in the evening, and they would talk until one of them grew too tired to continue. During those calls, May found herself sharing more of her life with him, her childhood dreams, her struggles after her father left, the weight of responsibility she had carried since her mother became ill. In turn, Jean revealed his own challenges, the loneliness of success, the pressure of living up to expectations, his fear that people only valued him for his money and position. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees me," he confessed one night. "Not the CEO, just me." "I see you," May had replied softly, and the silence that followed was filled with unspoken emotion. At home, her mother noticed the change in her. "You smile at your phone like it holds all the secrets of the universe," she observed one evening as May checked a message from Jean. "Is this about that boss of yours?" May hesitated, then nodded. She had told her mother about her promotion and about Jean, though she had downplayed the developing relationship, unsure how to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. Her mother sighed. "Be careful with your heart, my daughter. Men like him have many options. Women like us have fewer." "He's not like that," May defended him, though a small part of her harbored the same fears. "Perhaps not," her mother conceded. "But remember, fairy tales are just stories. Real life is much more complicated." 2 days before Jean was due to return, May encountered her first real test at her new job. A wealthy guest was furious about a room mix-up and was screaming at the front desk staff, demanding to speak to management. Mr. Patel was in a meeting off-site, so the staff turned to May. Taking a deep breath, she approached the red-faced man. "Sir, I'm Mr. Patel's assistant. How can I help resolve this situation?" The man turned his anger toward her. "You? What can you possibly do? Get me someone with actual authority." 6 weeks ago, May would have apologized and retreated. But something had changed in her. Whether it was the confidence from her promotion or from her conversations with Jean, she found herself standing taller. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but shouting at our staff won't solve the problem. If you'll give me 5 minutes, I believe I can find a solution that will satisfy you." The man looked taken aback by her calm assertiveness. After a moment, he grudgingly agreed. May quickly assessed the situation, made a few calls, and managed to upgrade the guest to a luxury suite at no additional charge. She also arranged for a complimentary dinner at the hotel's restaurant as an apology for the inconvenience. By the time Mr. Patel returned, the crisis had been averted, and the formerly angry guest was now singing the hotel's praises to anyone who would listen. "Well done," Mr. Patel said, impressed. "That was exactly how it should be handled." That evening, May called Jeanne instead of waiting for him to call her. "I solved a problem today," she told him, unable to keep the pride from her voice as she described the incident. "I'm not surprised," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You're capable of far more than you give yourself credit for." His belief in her warmed something deep inside. "I keep thinking about what you said, about seeing the gap between policy and practice. I think there are ways we could improve how things work, especially for the housekeeping staff." "Tell me your ideas," he said, and for the next hour, they discussed potential changes, from scheduling improvements to a staff wellness program. "These are excellent suggestions, May. Would you be willing to present them at our management meeting next week?" "I'll be back by then." The question caught her off guard. "Me? Present to management? Who better? You've lived the experience. Your perspective is invaluable." After they hung up, May sat in the small living room of the apartment she shared with her mother, feeling as though her life was shifting beneath her feet. 6 weeks ago, she had been an exhausted housekeeper struggling to make ends meet. Now she was developing policy proposals and preparing to present them to hotel management. And somewhere along the way, she had fallen for a man who should have been completely out of her reach. The day of Jeanne's return arrived with a mix of excitement and anxiety churning in May's stomach. She had prepared her presentation carefully, with Mr. Patel's guidance, but her nerves were less about public speaking and more about seeing Jeanne again. Would things be different in person after 3 weeks apart? Had she built up their connection in her mind to be more than it really was? She dressed with extra care that morning, wearing a simple but elegant dress she had splurged on with her new salary. As she walked through the hotel lobby, she caught her reflection in a mirror and barely recognized herself. It wasn't just the clothes, there was a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before. The management meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. May arrived early to set up her materials, her heart racing when she heard that Jeanne's car had just pulled up to the entrance. Minutes later, the conference room door opened, and he walked in, followed by several executives from the company headquarters. His eyes found hers immediately, and the warm smile he gave her sent butterflies swirling in her stomach. "Good morning, everyone," he greeted the room, but his gaze lingered on her. "I understand we have a special presentation today." Mr. Patel nodded. "Yes, sir. May has prepared some proposals for improving staff welfare and efficiency, based on her experience in housekeeping." "Excellent," Jeanne said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Please proceed, May." Taking a deep breath, she began her presentation. As she spoke, her initial nervousness faded, replaced by passionate conviction about the changes that could make a real difference in the lives of hotel staff. She outlined practical solutions for better scheduling, suggested a mentorship program for new employees, and proposed a staff rest area where workers could take genuine breaks. Throughout her presentation, Jeanne watched her with undisguised admiration. When she finished, he was the first to applaud. "These are exactly the kind of innovative, ground-level insights we need," he told the room. "I want to implement these changes not just here, but across all our properties." The other executives looked impressed, and Mr. Patel beamed with pride. After the meeting, people approached May to congratulate her and discuss her ideas further. She was speaking with the Human Resources Director when she felt a light touch on her elbow. Turning, she found Jeanne standing close beside her. "Do you have a moment?" he asked quietly. She nodded and followed him to a quiet corner of the room. "Your presentation was brilliant," he said. "But I didn't expect anything less." May smiled, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity." "Actually," he said, looking slightly nervous for the first time since she'd known him, "I was hoping you might join me for dinner tonight." "Not in the hotel, somewhere else." Somewhere we can talk privately. The weight of unspoken meanings hung in the air between them. This wasn't a casual dinner invitation or a business meeting. This was something more. "I'd like that," she replied softly. His face brightened. "I'll pick you up at 7. She nodded, and as he walked away to rejoin the executives, May felt as though she stood at a crossroads. Whatever happened tonight would change everything, for better or worse. As she gathered her presentation materials, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Remember what I said about fairy tales?" May stared at the message for a long moment. Yes, fairy tales weren't real. But maybe, just maybe, real life could sometimes be better than fairy tales, more complex, more challenging, but also more authentic. With that thought warming her heart, she texted back, "I remember. But I'm writing my own story now." 1 year later, May stood at the window of a spacious office on the 32nd floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel's corporate headquarters. The view of the city was breathtaking, especially as the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples. She smiled to herself, remembering a time when just the thought of entering this building would have intimidated her. How much had changed in a single year. The door opened behind her, and Jean walked in, loosening his tie after a long day of meetings. His face, tired from hours of negotiations, brightened immediately when he saw her. "There you are," he said, crossing the room to stand beside her. "I've been thinking about you all day." May leaned into him as his arm wrapped around her waist. "Good thoughts, I hope." "The best," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How was your day?" "Productive," she said. "The staff welfare program is now implemented in 15 more hotels, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Turnover rates are already down by 12%. Pride shone in Jean's eyes. "I told the board you were the best thing that ever happened to this company." "Just to the company?" she teased. "To me," he corrected, turning her to face him. "Definitely to me." Their journey to this moment had not been easy. After that pivotal dinner a year ago, the one where Jean had finally confessed his growing feelings for her, they had faced countless challenges. The board members had been skeptical of their relationship, concerned about appearances and potential conflicts of interest. Some of Jean's wealthy friends had barely hidden their disdain for his choice of partner. And within the company, rumors and gossip had followed May wherever she went. But they had weathered it all together. May had refused to be merely the CEO's girlfriend. Instead, she had used her unique perspective and experience to build something meaningful, a comprehensive program to improve working conditions for staff across all of Jean's hotels. Starting as a consultant and working her way up to Director of Employee Welfare and Development, she had earned respect through results, not through her relationship. "I spoke with your mother today," Jean mentioned as they gathered their things to leave the office. "She sounded well." May nodded. Thanks to better medical care they could now easily afford, her mother's health had improved significantly over the past year. She now lived in a comfortable apartment not far from May and Jean's home, and her brother had graduated college and started his own career. "She invited us for dinner this weekend," May said. "She's making your favorite dumplings." Jean smiled. It had taken time, but he had eventually won over May's cautious mother with his genuine care for May and his respect for their family. "I'll be there. But first," he checked his watch, "we have reservations at Lego in 30 minutes. May raised an eyebrow. "Lego? That's quite fancy for a Thursday night." "I'm feeling celebratory," he replied with a mysterious smile that made her wonder what he was planning. Lego was one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, perched on a cliff overlooking a lake just outside the city limits. As they were led to a private table on the terrace, May couldn't help but remember how nervous she had been the first time Jean had taken her to an upscale restaurant. "I had no idea which fork to use," she reminisced with a laugh as they settled into their seats. "And now you correct me," he teased back. As they enjoyed their meal, May reflected on their journey. There had been moments when she doubted whether they could make it work, whether the differences in their backgrounds and positions would eventually drive them apart. But with each challenge, their bond had only strengthened. Jean had never tried to change her or mold her into someone who would better fit his world. Instead, he had proudly stood beside her as she carved out her own place, on her own terms. And she had helped him reconnect with the values and perspective he had started to lose amid the isolation of extreme wealth and power. "Do you remember the night we met?" Jean asked suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts. "You mean the night you found a strange woman sleeping in your bed?" May laughed. "How could I forget? I was mortified. I was angry for about 3 seconds," he admitted. "But then I just stood there, watching you sleep, and something shifted inside me. It was like seeing something real and genuine in a world of pretense." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I think I started falling for you right then." May squeezed his hand. "I thought you were going to fire me on the spot. Instead, I promoted you. And now look at us," she said softly. After dessert, Jean suggested a walk along the lakeside path that wound below the restaurant. The night was cool but pleasant, with a full moon reflecting on the still water. They walked hand in hand in comfortable silence until Jean led her to a small, secluded gazebo overlooking the lake. "You know," he said, turning to face her, "a year ago, I was the CEO who had everything but felt like I had nothing that really mattered. My life was full of people who wanted something from me, but empty of anyone who just wanted me." May touched his face gently. "And I was just trying to survive each day, too exhausted to even dream of a different future." "We saved each other," he said simply. "We did," she agreed. Jean took a deep breath, and something in his expression made May's heart beat faster. "May, when I look at my life now, at the man I've become with you, I finally feel whole. You've taught me what really matters. You've challenged me, supported me, and loved me not for what I have, but for who I am." To her surprise, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. As he opened it, the moonlight caught the sparkle of a diamond ring, elegant and beautiful without being ostentatious, exactly the kind of ring she would have chosen for herself. "I don't want another day to pass without asking you to be my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled May's eyes as joy washed over her. This man, who could have had anyone, wanted her, not the polished version society might have expected him to choose, but her, with all her straightforwardness, determination, and simple values. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slid the ring onto her finger, May was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From an exhausted housekeeper accidentally falling asleep in a CEO's bed to becoming his equal partner in both life and purpose, it was a story neither of them could have imagined. 6 months later, May stood in a dressing room of a beautiful countryside estate, her mother fussing with the simple but elegant wedding dress she had chosen. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, a mix of Jean's business associates, their mutual friends, and her own family and former colleagues. Jia, her old supervisor, had even come, now working as a regional trainer in the staff welfare program May had developed. Their once strained relationship had transformed into a respectful professional one over time. "Are you nervous?" her mother asked, adjusting the flowers in May's hair. "No," May replied honestly. "This feels right, like everything has led us here." A knock at the door announced the arrival of her brother, handsome in his suit and ready to walk her down the aisle. "It's time, sis," he said with a wide smile. "Your CEO is waiting." As May walked toward the garden where the ceremony would take place, she thought about the fairy tales her mother had warned her about. This wasn't a fairy tale, it was better. It was real, with all the complications, challenges, and compromises that real love entailed. She and Jean had built something authentic together, not based on fantasy or social expectations, but on genuine connection, mutual respect, and shared values. They had found each other across divides of status and circumstance, not because fate had decreed it, but because they had both been brave enough to see beyond labels and brave enough to choose each other, again and again. The music changed, and the assembled guests rose to their feet as May appeared at the end of the flower-lined aisle. At the other end stood Jean, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love and happiness that it took her breath away. As she began to walk toward him, May thought of the exhausted housekeeper she had once been, collapsing onto a CEO's bed after working herself to the point of collapse. That moment of human vulnerability, hers in sleeping, his in showing compassion rather than anger, had cracked open the door to everything that followed. Sometimes, the greatest love stories began in the most unlikely moments. When she reached Jean, he took her hands in his, their eyes locking in a silent acknowledgement of their journey. "Ready?" he whispered. "For everything," she replied. And as they turned to face their future together, May knew that this wasn't the end of their story, but simply the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, word by word, day by day, with honesty, purpose, and love. For all the differences in their starting points, they had found in each other something rare and precious, a home for their truest selves, and a partner with whom to build a life of meaning. As they exchanged their vows under the golden light of the setting sun, surrounded by those who had witnessed their remarkable journey, May and Jean proved that sometimes, real life could indeed be more beautiful than any fairy tale, not because it was perfect, but because it was authentically theirs.